So there's been an abbey, ecclesiastical centre from the early Chaldees, 7th century. This is 19th century. Dressed George in a kilt.
The Heirloom audio production team have come to Scotland. They're about to record the G.A. Henty novel In Freedom's Cause, which tells the story of Scottish heroes William Wallace and Robert the Bruce. To gain an understanding about what made these heroes great, the production team are visiting the sites where Wallace and Bruce lived, died, and most importantly, fought the English.
We're taking a tour of the abbey where the body of Robert the Bruce is buried. And this is significant to our project, and so our tour guide is filling us in on all the background, and it's our first stop of the day, so here we are.
Robert the Bruce died in 1329. He died in a place called Cardross, which is through the west coast of Scotland next to Dumbarton. And he was brought here and laid to rest here because this was the ancient capital of Scotland. And this is where the kings and queens were buried. He died in his bed of natural causes. He was a fighter all his days, and he died at the age of 55.
Out of the sanctuary, right out of the sanctuary, in the nave is where they're waiting for him.
I thought it was outside. I thought he goes outside.
Well, they're in the nave in the book and in history. They're not in some far apart. They're right outside the chapel. Because he walks out of the chapel where he killed him and says, I killed him. And they said, you think? But I'm going to make sure. And then they walk right in there. So it would have been like walking out of that door and they're waiting in here.
Because I guess the way I read it is he comes out of the church outside. I guess I read it as being outside, as in.
But that's only because you're thinking of an American church where you leave the church and you're outside the building. You leave the church and you're in the nave.
This is fascinating. You get a sense of the place you feel the history here when you're here, and it gives you a sense of place. It gives you a sense of context. When I'm directing them, I'm going to be picturing places just like this. Yeah.
The team then notice the sound of a door handle, which could be used in the show.
It does have a nice squeak to it. Yeah. It's got the right amount of.
Oh, cool. With the. Oh yeah. Look at that. I almost think that's more like a realistic castle latch than.
That's cool.
Sound designer Rob Jorgensen is then given the task of recording the effect. He has to have absolute silence for the sound to work.
What I wanted to get was the feel of space. So you notice when I was dropping the door handle, I would wait and allow the sound to ring out completely. Gives me an idea of how I can recreate that ring when we get back into the studio. But also, I found a squeak point in the door, and I wanted to get a couple of different squeaks so that you can use that for opens and closes. And then I was using a lot of latches because that allows me to get the actors to have some movement when they're next to a door. The amazing thing about being able to record here is that we'll be able to recreate the exact sound that is in this very room. It takes making sound effects to another level to be able to take a sound effect from the actual, from a door that may have been touched by the characters. So to be able to use that in the show will bring a whole new level of, well, authenticity, but an amazing sense of history for me.
Next stop, the Wallace Monument in Stirling. The site overlooks William Wallace's greatest battle against the English.
The English had killed his father, they'd killed his uncle, they'd killed his brother. They had come into Scotland to put down English laws. They had murdered in battle and out with battle tens of thousands of Scots. One of the things that people look at is without Wallace, we wouldn't have had a Scotland. Scotland would not have existed. To me, Wallace was a good guy. He's fought and he stood up for what he believed in a free Scotland. So the monument here was built because it was here that William Wallace and his partner Andrew de Moray surveyed the land. And that was really important because he used the land in a tactical and a strategic way, which ultimately led to the victory, which is so important in 1297. So that's why the statue is here, and it's understood as well that perhaps even during the battle it was here that he commanded, and he and de Moray and his flag bearers commanded and controlled the movement of troops. Why Stirling was so important was its location within Scotland. It was the centre point and the gateway to the Highlands, and the Highlands made up the vast majority, 2/3 to 3/4 of the landmass of Scotland. So if you controlled Stirling Castle, you controlled what was beneath it, which was the bridge over the River Forth. The English were coming to try and regain control of this part of Scotland, and so if you controlled the bridge, you controlled ultimately, to a large point, Scotland and the movement of people through it. What we're doing now is we're literally retracing the steps of half of the English army, and why would the Scots give up their position, their safe zone, on this side, where the area we're heading to? Well, why? Because over there is a bottleneck. This is the River Forth here that runs around, so we have a little bow and a bottleneck of land, which at the time was very boggy and very marshy, nowhere near as dry as it is now. So in actual fact, what the Scots were doing is they were gaining an advantage. They allowed about half of the English army. So imagine, you're the Scots, you're all lined up, and you're waiting, and you're waiting, and you're waiting, and you're allowing the English to come over, thousands of them and thousands of them. And imagine the control that the Scottish generals and lieutenants must have had to keep these guys from breaking rank and going, exactly. And so they allowed about half. And remember that at this point, it was about wide enough for 3 men. It wasn't wide enough for 3 horses. So the heavy cavalry had to dismount and lead their horses over. Yeah. So we have half of the English army dismounted, crowded on this boggy, marshy ground, disarray, reforming into their units. The archers over here, the longbowmen, the English longbowmen, and Welsh mercenaries as well, couldn't fire into the combat when it began because, of course, they would have mown down the English. When the battle began, the English had nowhere to go. So they were forced back with this big, it was almost that quintessential Scottish charge, and later history became the Highland Charge. And they came down from the drier high ground, from the Wallace Monument and Abbey Crag up there, and they forced the English back. So there was only a small fighting front, so the numbers that the English had were negated effectively. It was one man versus one man. So the English were moving back, retreating, after the impact of the charge, the boggy ground, the disarray, and so on. The archers couldn't be used, the horses are going wild and rearing up. And of course then they come to the Forth here, at which point they're heading into the water, heavy armoury taking them down. Many of the men retreated back onto the bridge. The bridge gave way, met their death, and it's said that the River Forth ran red, and in fact it was full of so many dead bodies that you could walk across the river over the dead bodies of the English. And the battle was over in a matter of hours, a couple of hours, at enormous loss to the English and very limited loss to the Scots. So as exactly as you say, Bill. Strategically,
he's letting their greatest strength become their greatest weakness, is he not? Which is a brilliant strategy.
Yeah, quite.
The 23rd of June, 1314. Morning. The Battle of Bannockburn, the battle of all battles, was about to begin. 100,000 English soldiers stood, the sun shining bright on their innumerable standards and pennons, glistening from lance, head, spear, and armour.
Here we have the words spoken by Robert the Bruce the day before the battle. We fight not for glory, nor for wealth, nor honour, but only and alone we fight for freedom, which no good man surrenders, but with his life. So what he was saying here to his men were, we may die here, but there's a greater cause here and there's a greater good, so you're doing the right thing for yourself, your family, and your country and your people.
He was their friend, he was in covenant with them, so he was also charismatic, right? And so his appeal to them was one to the heart. And so how much different is that? That's very Scottish compared to the English saying, you go into battle because if you retreat, I'm going to be behind you with an axe and whack you. Where this is friends fighting with friends.
There was an element, you know, of feudalism and whatever in the Scottish army to begin with. And the army was much bigger. And as the campaign went on, those kind of people that were there for the coin and the mercenaries had left. So by the time we got here, this were men fighting for him willingly. But what's probably important is that they knew, not just the soldiers, but the people of Scotland generally knew that without Bruce, they were not going to get their independence back, and their cause was lost. So he was the man, you know, the man that had the ability, had the skill, and was able to forge Scotland.
Edward had charged into battle at the head of a magnificent army. Now, 30,000 English lay dead on the field, and King Edward was forced to flee to England in a fishing boat. With Bannockburn, all of England's hopes to subjugate Scotland came to an end. The war continued fitfully for 40 more years, but at length, peace was signed at Northampton. Scotland was finally free!
It doesn't just take lots of men, strong men with weapons to win battles. It takes leaders and good decision-making and good preparation. And I think this is what we've seen with Wallace and Bruce.
We fight for freedom, which no good man surrenders, but with his life.
The team returned to London to begin work recording In Freedom's Cause. But the echoes of William Wallace and Robert the Bruce are never far away.
When I was on the Wallace Memorial and just looking out over, I get the sense of like being there.
To go to the Wallace Monument and to stand in the very place where he stood.
And there's something almost just magical about that, just seeing what he saw. And
that was the highlight of the trip because that was such an important battle for Wallace. And to stand near or in the same place that he stood, I mean, that blew me away.